Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Jan's Opening Clinic. My name is Jan Gustafsson, and this is the show where I do my very best to answer chess24.com premium members' opening questions that they have previously posted in an article. This, first of all, it's a rare suit-up episode. Secondly, it's an episode where I think we get very good questions that made me think quite a bit. I also learned something new, and I'm going to have to reveal a thing or two that I'd rather have kept for myself, but I am trying to answer these questions as honestly as I can. So let's jump right into them and see if we can all learn something or not. We will start with an old friend of the show, the London system. And as much as I hate to admit it, the more I look at the London system, the more I'm starting to realize that it's actually a decent opening. So Galactic is getting at one critical line here, and he's saying, hello Jan, in the London, after 1 d4, e6, bishop f4, knight f6, e3, c5, c3, d5, knight d2, bishop d6. Anyway, we'll put it on the board, you can see the little diagram there. e5, knight h5, h4, how should black proceed? Then he gives a sample of recent games played in that position. And he's asking, what do you think? How would you equalize in this variation? Thanks a lot for your precious help, Galactic. And my answer is, it might be too late in that position, Galactic. This is a bit of a problem, so let's jump into the action and see why it bothers me and why it bothers Mr. Galactic. He gave a weird move order, but it's not that important for our purposes. I have to say, the more I look at the London, the more I'm starting to think that maybe black is making his life easiest if he just goes for d5 here, wherever knight d2, bishop d6, knight f3, castles, and then plays b6, bishop a6. If this bishop moves, that does strike me as a reliable way. Might not be the sexiest, but I'm starting to come around to that conclusion. Because in the stuff I gave in my video series, like, let's say in this position, e3, c5, not only can we transpose to the lines we just had, even this d takes c5 move is not as simple as I originally thought. So, long story short, London system, not too bad. But let's get to Galactic's question. He gives this move order. And first of all, in this move order, if you reach this position, here I believe it makes a lot of sense to delay the move knight to c6. Here you can start with short castles. And the point is that if white goes knight gf3, you play queen to c7, and the idea is to play knight bd7 followed by e5. I believe that equalizes reasonably straightforwardly here. Let's say bishop d3, knight bd7, castles, e5. And there's not much that white can do. This is just an equalizer. There could be some move order issues here, but if you get such with delaying knight c6, it makes a lot of sense to delay it further. Like here, bishop d3, queen c7, let's say, takes. White can play with f4, but it's not such a big deal. b6, bishop a6 coming, and black should be fine as well. So, bit of a side note, because the line he's giving, I am not a big fan of from the black perspective. So bishop d3, b6, queen to e2. This is, I believe, a development I briefly touched on in my video series, but I was focusing on short castles. And this queen e2 is asking some serious questions. Galactic's main line continues with bishop b7, and the white point is rook to d1. He delays castling and keeps the option of going h4. Rook to e8. I have a feeling rook to e8 might already not be great here. I played this myself in a game once, but I'm no longer very happy with it. So rook e8, e4, this is white's point. Bishop e7 is the best move for whatever reason, but it's the only decent move. e5, knight h5, and pawn to h4. And this is just a scary position for black. I put my engines on quite a bit here as well, and I came to similar conclusions to Galactic that the only good move seems to be knight takes g3, f takes g. Now Galactic mentioned rook to f8, but I'm not a big fan. Like some of these funky new engines, Lila already likes knight to g5 here for white, but even if white plays more slowly, I think Galactic gave pawn to a3 or short castles. I do think that white has the better chances here. This bishop is just such an idiot. So I tried to make queen to c7 work instead of rook f8, I believe. In this position, this is the best that black has, but I was not very satisfied with the results either. After, well, computing has different moves. Rook to c1, pawn to a3. Not a big fan of black's position. So we might have to look for alternatives earlier, Mr. Galactic. One that I think is sort of decent is to play h6, either here or a move later after bishop b7, rook d1, and now h6. I believe that is a playable move. The best white try is, since now e4 no longer really works, as black just takes on d4, and there's no pawn hanging here. So e5, just d takes c, and black is better. So the best white try seems to be knight to e5, and then we get some strange position after queen to c7, pawn to f4, knight to e7, where black wants knight e4, so white should probably go queen to f3. And my engines, after some thought, are spitting out some move like knight to h7, preparing f6. And this seems to hold. It's not exactly a dream, I'll admit, but it does seem to hold. Castles f6, queen h5, queen c8. Some stuff like this. Knight g6, knight takes. Let's say bishop takes. Pawn to f5. And black comes out alive at the end of this. But yeah, I have to admit, it's not that tempting to me. But if reaching this position after queen to rook d1, currently h6 does look like a better bet. Then rook to e8, because this e4, as Galactic mentions, is a real problem. Yeah, you can go for h6 and move earlier as well, but I see no particular reason to do so, because after knight e5, you should go bishop b7 anyway. And then it's better to have waited for white to play rook d1, which might not always be useful. So if you reach this position, the best I can see is the move h6 here, but I would advise to deviate earlier. Depends on your move order. If you get this position Galactic style, then I'm team queen c7, knight bd7, followed by e5. And if you get this via a different move order, let's say knight d2, knight c6, knight f3, here I still have a soft spot for the cd, ed, knight h5, which I gave in my video series. There's some tricky lines there as well, but it does strike me as, yeah, I don't know, more interesting than the bishop d6. But in bishop d6, go rook to e8, go pawn to h6 instead of rook to e8. I believe that is the best direction that black has there. Thanks for the question, Galactic. And sorry, the London system is still out there and kicking. Let's see what else we have. Mr. Assassin in White. You're saying, I hope you're still fresh to answer my question. And grab that lovely cup of coffee. If not, it's almost empty already. But here we are, Assassin in White. What are your thoughts on that position arising in the fashionable a6 line after d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, a6, cd, ed, queen b3? What are black's options and what are the upsides and downsides of them? If black plays bishop e7, he says no to the option of bishop d6 after bishop f4. And bishop d6 can be answered by bishop g5 with an annoying pin. Yeah, that's no good. Black makes a semi-waiting move and semi-prophylactical move h6, Magnus style. White can use that to get extra tempo on 6 bishop f4 line with 7 bishop f4, and black doesn't seem to be in time with bishop f5 as white plays bishop d3 first. Yeah, and I'm a bit confused who benefits and why after moves like 6c5 and especially 6b5. Those I probably want to hear more about. Thank you for your answer. Stay fresh. I'm trying. I'm hanging in there, Assassin in White. Let's get to Mr. Assassin's stuff. So what was it? d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, a6. We didn't have enough moves to play in this position already. c6, c5, knight b7, bishop e7, bishop b4, dc4. We have to add a6 to that line as well. And Assassin in White mentions a very reasonable try for white. C takes d, e takes d, and now queen to b3. So the main moves, bishop to f4 or bishop to g5. I think Assassin in White also explained decently that the point is that if the bishop goes to d6, then white goes bishop g5, and if the bishop goes to e7, then white goes bishop to f4. So you're fishing for a commitment from that bishop. h6, like Magnus likes to play, is interesting. stopping bishop g5 and intending after bishop f4 to play bishop d6 in one go. These types of positions, I guess white is slightly better. There is some game. I forgot who it was. Melkum Jan with white against Magnus. Magnus played some b6, but had to suffer a bit in that game. So I understand you're not too keen on getting this position. And also after h6, e4 is an option. After which it's not completely obvious how black equalizes. Some knight takes e4, queen takes d5. And white might be a little better here as well. So you mentioned b5. I don't like this move b5. And I believe it's actually refuted move by move. But I also just positionally it's too ugly for me. I'm old school. So bishop b5, bishop g5, bishop e6. White can play more slowly here, but the direct stuff, bishop f6, queen f6, and pawn to a4, very important. Just seems to be good for white. Pawn to a4, forces pawn to b4, knight takes d5, queen d8, e4, c6, and now we just say, you know what, you want a piece. But I'm very developed, and the key move is to move queen to e3. After which my computers just say, what is better? cd, ed, queen d5, rook to c1, bishop comes out to c4, and move by move. It just does not seem to work for black. So b5 no good. Also bishop d3 is a key move in some lines here. Bishop e7, bishop d3, turning bishop e4. Just doesn't work. But the move that I do like for black here, relatively, I think queen b3 is a legit try. But I do think black should play c5. That's a logical reaction to the queen coming out early. And it's not obvious to me what white wants here. I believe in practice they usually play bishop to g5. Black should play c4, gaining a tempo against the queen. Queen to c2. And this position, bishop to b4, looks most logical to me. Sort of Ragozin style, pinning this knight. And I couldn't find anything dramatic. If white plays slowly here, e3, let's say h6, bishop h4, knight to c6, or pawn to g5 first. Black just gets a good Ragozin, where white lost the tempo with the queen, queen b3, queen c2. Something like this, knight e4, bishop f5 is coming. Black is very, very fine. So what white should do is meet bishop b4 with pawn to e4. But here, more for sequences after d takes e4. Does look to me that black holds in some crazy positions. Bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, queen takes e4 check, queen e6. White has to go knight to e5. And it becomes very move-by-move stuff, where I didn't spend forever checking this, but according to my engines, black sort of holds here. f6, bishop takes c4. It was important to include bishop takes c3, more weirdness. You would think queen e7 is more natural, keeping this pin. But after queen e7, white is better, since castles, bishop c3. Bishop f7 check now is strong, forcing this king to f8, and then b takes c3. Since king d8 doesn't quite work because of queen d5 check. Don't ask me why, but this is the engine answers to this position, and this is just a computer position. So black has to go bishop c3, bc, queen e7. Now bishop f7 is no longer as powerful, because now black can go king d8 and queen d5. King to c7 doesn't really do a lot of damage. So after queen e7 here, white should play something like f4, sacrificing a piece, f takes e5, short castles. And this still looks scary for black, but the computer says move by move. He does hold. g6, fe, bishop f5, queen e3, knight c6, or knight d7, with a messy position, but I could not find any advantage for white. This might look very deep from, or far away from the position after queen b3, c5, but the line seems reasonably forcing to me. This bishop g5, c4, queen c2, bishop b4. White has to play e4, and then it's really all move by move. So, long story short, queen b3 is an interesting try. I do think that c5 holds. I understand you don't like any of the alternatives. Thanks for the question, Mr. Assassin en Blanc. What do we have next? We have Aisthesis, another opening playing regular. He's saying, hi Jan, currently I'm trying to make the Queen's Gambit declined with 3 bishop e7 work, as I dislike the exchange variation in the normal Queen's Gambit declined. However, there is a sideline that annoys me very much. After d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop e7, cd, ed, bishop f4, c6, e3, bishop f5, knight g2, knight d7. There's the move 8h4, see diagram. To my limited understanding, this seems to be an improved version of the more common knight g3, bishop g6, h4, where black can simply take the pawn and equalize with bishop takes h4. In the given position, however, white is just better after bishop h4, queen b3, so black is forced to make a concession like h5. Now white can go knight g3 under more favorable circumstances with a slight advantage according to my engine. What would you recommend me to do? Thanks in advance and keep up the great work. Thank you. I agree with everything you said. I believe that ah4 is a very good move. It was played by my colleague on Team Carlsen, Mr. Dubov, who's a guy who can usually be trusted on opening matters. I believe he even won a nice game against Dominguez, was it? So let's put it on the board. You want to play bishop e7. The point is to avoid this knight f6, cd, ed, bishop g5, the main Carlsbad line. C takes d, e takes d, bishop to f4, pawn to c6. I should point out that, yeah, I like the alternative knight f6 here, somewhat better than pawn to c6, and after e3. Both bishop f5 and short castles, as far as I know, have not been refuted and lead to at least interesting play with short castles, bishop d3, c5 business, and bishop f5 are all these messes after queen b3, knight to c6. So that's the main alternative if you want to stick to this territory, because yeah, I kind of agree. After c6, e3, bishop f5, knight ge2, knight to d7, ah4 is a very clever move. Just waiting one move with knight to g3. For the reasons mentioned in the question, that if you start with knight g3, how does this go? Bishop g6, h4. Now, black can take the pawn. Well, if you start with h4, black can't, since here after queen b3, I believe that black is in trouble already, like some knight b6, a4, or something like this was played. So the pawn can't be touched. And you mentioned h5, which, yeah, is a big concession after knight g3. Bishop g6, bishop d3. White should just be better. So the best black can do here, in my opinion, is to play knight gf6. This was also played in this game I mentioned. I think Dubov against Dominguez, maybe? Knight g3, and now put the bishop on e6. Not on g6, because it gets kicked with h5. Bishop to d3, short castles. Here knight f5 was played. Not the only move. White can also play some queen c2. When black should go for rook e8, bishop f8, and hope for the best. I'm not sure if this is a great setup, but it does look kind of playable. So knight f5 was played there. And here, the best I could see was this weird move, bishop to b4. Pawn to a3, takes, and play some position like this, where I think white should be better. I do believe in the bishops, but it's a complicated position with the knight pair against the bishop pair. This pawn is a little weak. Knight c4, queen a5. Black does have some active prospects. But, as I said, I do agree with everything you said, and I also like this line for white. So I would avoid it. I'm not a bishop e7 guy, but if I had to be one, I would probably prefer knight to f6 followed by short castles currently over the c6 line that you gave. Hope that helped, or, well, didn't really help, I guess, but just confirming that I agree with your conclusion. What else do we have? Mr. Fluffington. Mr. Fluffington is saying, "Hi Jan, could you possibly describe the general steps top players use to learn, study, revise an opening? Let's say, just for example, I want to learn to play the Grunfeld. I understand that not all players do everything exactly the same way. But can you describe a typical process whereby a top player would go about it? E.g., 1. Memorize the main lines." Now, you never start with memorizing. But from where? Books, chess base. 2. Memorize some sidelines. Once again, stop the memorizing. But where? How many? How many moves of theory? 3. Study games in these lines to understand typical positions. 4. Play the opening over the board. 5. Revise as needed based on the outcome of the opening over the board. Are current top players doing all this electronically? Yes. Do they keep a spiral notebook of handwritten notes? Nope. It's no longer the 1970s. How do they practice the opening prior to and then later on in between OTB games? And perhaps think of it this way. If you were coaching a promising youth, what would your advice be to that player in terms of how to efficiently add an opening to his or her repertoire? Many thanks. Also loving all the great Chess24 content. Thank you, Mr. Fluffington. Alright, so yeah, let's get to the beginning. you want to learn, or you want to start playing the Grunfeld with black. As I mentioned, not everybody is the same. I quite like, and I know quite some top players that also have this approach, to first start with someone else's work. So in the Grunfeld case, off the top of my head, I don't know all the recent publications, but I would probably check out Peter Svidler's video series on Chess24 on the Grunfeld and pick up some of the IsaVulpes books on the Grunfeld. I think those are the latest sources. Once again, I'm not sure. I might be missing out on some books that have come out on the Grunfeld or other material. But yeah, that would typically be my first step. Not so much to trust them or memorize them, but to get an overview. Then the second step is normally you create files with analysis. So you have the book or the video series as an overview to know what's what, and then you start typically in the main lines that are currently most popular. Start creating a file. Let's say in the Grunfeld you create a file, knight f3, c5, rook b1 for black. And in that file you can, for example, put the analysis in that you find in the book. I usually start just switching on engines like, yeah, whatever, Stockfish and Lila Zero these days. Then have a look what has recently been played in high-level games, both over the board and correspondence, so you check the databases. You maybe drag and drop some of the games that look critical to you into that file. And yeah, then you try to figure out what the critical positions are, which normally these games will tell you, and your sources might also tell you. And maybe you agree with the solution in the book, or you don't, and then you have to find something else. Typically, especially if you're studying something for black, things will more or less be solved because black does hold in all the major openings. But for example, in the Grunfeld currently, if you were picking it up, you would have to study these games that Carlsen played against Grishuk, Carlsen played against MVL, and Carlsen played against Mamedyarov. That's a trendy line, and try to fix it. There is usually no memorizing involved in this process. This is more, yeah, whatever you want to call it, analyzing, or you write your own private electronic book. So you create that file, and then you rinse and repeat the process for other lines that you consider critical, or even that you consider less critical, just to have a complete repertoire. They're often in the less critical lines. If you have some source material, like let's say Svidler's series, you can pretty much rely on that, but normally you still run it through a modern engine because you want to know if he blinks somewhere. But usually less stuff happens in the sidelines, so you don't spend as much time on them and you don't go as deep. But if you're thorough and doing it properly, which I have to admit I don't always do, but you do have a file on all the lines that you consider playable for white in that case. Then what were the other steps? 3, study games in these lines to understand typical positions. Yeah, I'm not sure. Frankly, I don't think that's done all that much in opening work that you study complete games, but it's part of the process. Like your analysis doesn't stop on move 10, but you have a look around. What has been played where? How did the games end? Was it a blunder later on that concluded the outcome, or is there some problem? So it's, yeah, the studying games is sort of part of the analysis process. For play the opening over the board, yeah. If you want to play it in tournament games, then usually what you do is once you've done your homework, which ideally is called homework, you've done at home and not before the tournament, then you play somebody, then you will check their games in the database and repeat the lines that you consider most likely to happen. There, I think guys are different. Some repeat their whole repertoire, their whole analysis. Some say, okay, this guy always plays that, the other stuff I have enough experience with, or I just looked at it, so I'm confident I'll remember. It's always a balance. Usually people spend like 2 hours preparing before a game, so you typically can't try to memorize every single detail, but you go for the stuff that's most likely, or where you're most unsure. But that's where the memorizing, if you want to call it that, takes place. The other stuff, you sort of rely on your brain that while you're analyzing it, it will keep track of the most important stuff. But just by passive memorizing, you normally, first of all, you don't really learn because you haven't thought or had your engine think about the critical positions. And secondly, you don't know if you can trust the outcomes. So this memorizing is, yeah, I think an overrated part of the opening things. Because yeah, you sort of pick up things while you look at it. And what was 5? Revise as needed based on the outcome of the opening over the board. Yeah, not that much, frankly, because it happens very rarely that your opening, a mainline opening like the Grunfeld, will be refuted in the over-the-board game. More often than not, if you've done your work properly, it will be. I should have looked more at this, or I should have looked more at that, if anything, but it won't, very often bring you to completely new conclusions. But it could happen, of course. Of course, you keep track of what you've played already, and if it could be repeated, or if you should find a new surprise for the next game, or if there was even something wrong with it. Yeah, our top player is doing all this electronically. Yeah, all this stuff is very electronically nowadays. Some people, I think, like to bring books, but it's very rare. Mainly people are just relying on their database. How do they practice the opening prior to and then later on in between over the board games? Yeah, as I mentioned, you repeat your files 2 hours before over the board games. Then if you have a training session, sometimes people will play training games from certain positions that they feel is critical. Of course, you can also do that thing by using the opening in whatever, online blitz games, or by playing online against friends before you want to use it in tournaments. So, yeah, I believe that is the process. Sounds like a long process, but nowadays where information is out there, good information, like especially in the Grunfeld, and engines are very strong. If you focus on it, I believe in a week one can pick up something like the Grunfeld to a fairly decent level. Note to self, pick up the Grunfeld. Anyway, I hope that helped you, Mr. Fluffington. And of course I should also notice, you asked about top players, but the lower your level is, the less you have to do this self-analyzing and checking stuff with engines. You can start here with source material and organizing it in a way that's comfortable to you, and then repeat it before games if needed. Alright, do we have more questions? Shmueliki is saying, hello Jan, and thanks for your amazing work at Chess24. Thank you so much. Recently, I started playing with black the Carlsen-Nabati line against the Spanish. 5 bishop c5, 6 short castles. Although I like that as the main weapon against strong players, I find it very hard to play for a win with black in the endgames that arise, like in Kayakin Carlsen and Vallejo Carlsen. In contrast, I think those endgames are very interesting, and you can play for a win there if white is not careful. Hang on, are you contradicting yourself from the last sentence? Anyway, so I tried to find a line with the same attitude. So first I took a look at the 5b5, 6 bishop c5 line, but I didn't like for black 7a4, rook b8, 11f3 with put us on the board, like in Morganov Globus and some other games. I didn't find something I liked for black there, but maybe you can. I also tried to make the move order 5 bishop c5, c3, b5 work, but I felt that after 7 bishop c2, black gets a worse version of the Archangal line after 76, and after 75 he gets a worse endgame, like in Hushambit Colors 2019 Internet. Thanks for your great help. Yep, don't thank me yet, but this is all territory. Territory? That's close to my heart, all these lines. I've sort of been playing on and off with black if I need a break from the Marshall. So let's go through them in the order that you've mentioned. Castles, bishop c5, c3. You mentioned short castle. This is what Magnus played twice. And yeah, there are white after d4, bishop a7. He does have alternatives, but he can go for these. At the very least, very solid endgames. After, how does this line go? Something like this, yeah? Bishop c2, knight e7, queen somewhere. d5, takes. And yeah, black should hold, but white is, I would guess, very slightly better. So I understand. It's not an everyday line if you want to play for a win. Then you brought up the Archangal. Peter Svidler did a video series on this one as well. And you mentioned you don't like one specific line here, or was it knight e5 first? Ah, it was without ab5. Knight e5, d4, bishop d4, queen d4, d6. and pawn to f3, which, yeah, seems to be a new trend. I have to admit I wasn't aware of this move before I saw your question. But yeah, I couldn't really refute it, or it's obviously a serious idea. First things first, it seems important that black starts with c5, because if you go castles... There were some games with bishop f4, but even rook d1, just trying to stop c5 annoyed me. So you start with c5, and then the queen goes to f2. Now short castles, and yeah, here white seem to have some alternatives. I guess the most critical is knight to c3. I also looked at some bishop e3 kind of move, but then after c4, bishop a2, rook e8, preparing d5 at the right moment. Looked to me like black was fine. Rook d1, queen e7, something along those lines, and I thought black should be okay. But even these positions are tricky to play, I will admit. And yeah, after knight c3, I didn't really reinvent the wheel. I couldn't quite make c4, b4 work as well here. These things should be playable for black, but I have to admit, it looked like white somewhat better. So I settled on b4, knight to e2, and now this move rook e8, without committing to c4 just yet. When, yeah, the position is very complex. Black wants queen c7, bishop e6 at the right moment, keeping the c4, d5 breaks in mind, and white has to figure out how to arrange everything. I'm not saying this ends the line, this is a complicated position where white certainly has chances, but I do not think that it would stop me from playing the archangels necessarily. I think it's just a full-fledged fight here. So yeah, basically I should thank you for letting me know about this f3, which I did not. But yeah, I believe most people are still mainly concerned about these lines in this move, or a5, bishop a7, a3, this kind of stuff. And this knight takes e5. At least I don't think it's considered a refutation, but I would have to spend more time on this 11 f3 to give you a very reliable answer. For now, it looks to me like after c5, black's very much in business. So moving on to 5 bishop c5. Yeah, the point is after c3, b5, bishop b3. Now, first of all, there's no longer these lines that you were afraid of with knight takes e5, and after d6, pawn to a4. Black even has other options. He doesn't have to go rook b8, but he can play bishop b7 or bishop g4. So if white would go bishop b3, black gains some flexibility by starting with this bishop c5. And yeah, you mentioned bishop c2 is critical. I agree, I don't like d6 very much, so d5. And here, the game you mentioned is with 8a4. Obviously white has alternatives here, d4, ed5. You name them, but 8a4 is indeed very critical. After d takes e4, a takes b5. I think in the game you gave e takes f3 was played. Which, yeah, I sort of agree with that as well, that it doesn't look like an easy equalizer. This is some long theoretical stuff. But these positions, yeah, not so easy to play for black. This is the game Huschenbit Collas that you mentioned. There is an alternative here for black. This move bishop to g4, which leads to very, very messy play. And I can't say I've finished this topic, but I would guess this is the place where you want to look. Like, it starts with b, c, e, f, g, h, g, f, bishop a3, rook e1, short castles, rook a5, queen d6, b4. And as you can see, computers first are excited, but then it continues forever in such lines. And things are not clear at all. It's a complete mess. And I believe if you go all the way here, then the computer should hold for black. I'll give you a fun sample, and this is by no means forced. But it's if you keep pressing the button, something you get. And 0, 0, 0, for example, king d4, rook e4. King d5, rook g4, and the game very much continues, but black is fine. So yeah, it would break the format of this show to give an exhausting for coverage of the bishop g4, but I believe this is the direction you should look at, because I kind of agree that e takes f is not the solution. As mentioned, white has alternatives here, d4 and e takes d5 and whatnot, but a4 is indeed very critical. and the viability of this line, I believe, depends on this stuff. So, yeah, more or less agree with stuff you said. I believe that black is in business in both the b5 bishop c5 line and in the bishop c5 c3 b5 line. You're right that in bishop c5 c3 castles you do allow these endgames where, yeah, I kind of agree that black's winning chances are limited, even though Magnus did win it with black against Vallejo. So that's that. Thanks for the question. Hope I could help a bit. Mr. Oops, why do I keep doing this? Shmueliki. What else do we have? We have IsaVulpes. Queen's Gambit declined Vienna Pawn sec. My memory is bad, but you keep asking about those, right? Or maybe that's why he calls it part 17. Generally, I keep getting a lot of questions about the bishop takes 6 bishop takes c4 pawn sec in the Vienna in every opening clinic, and I guess my answers are becoming a bit repetitive. It's probably what I should do at some point, is just do a little video to update the developments since I did my video series on the Vienna. But for now, here, let's see what IsaVulpes has to say. Vienna pawn sec, bishop c4, knight takes e4, 7 short castles. Not a fan of knight c3, bc bishop e7, nor of 7 knight f6. I'm still a fan of 7 knight f6, just for the record. So I'd like to make knight takes c3, b takes c, bishop d6 work. Yeah, less a fan of that, but let's go through it. The main line seems to run knight h5, h6, queen h5 castle. I'll put all this on the board in a minute. Knight e4, f5, knight d6, cd, and has most games ending in draws after bishop h6 with a perpetual, but white could of course go for bishop f4, rook e1, similar. So my question would be a three-parter on the position after 12 cd6. Would you agree that the path up to there is the critical line of 8 bishop d6, or did I miss an important white option? How survivable do you think black position is in a practical game, given white doesn't just go for the draw, or given I want to avoid it and I respond with 13 queen 7, I guess to bishop h6 that is. If it is survivable, would you have any pointers as to how the game should progress? Low depth engine goes for d5 king h7 rook f6 setup and then sort of things. That's sufficient defense. Would you play this differently? Typically, I might play this like high depth engine, but usually you can trust these guys on how to play these positions. Anyway, there was a lot of stuff to take in, so let's bring up our little chessboard and hit the good old Vienna pawn sec. d5, knight c3, dc, e4, bishop b4, bishop takes c4, knight takes e4, short castles. As I mentioned, my current favorite is knight f6 back, but IsaVulpes is asking about knight c3, bc, and bishop to d6. Now, first of all, he asked if he's missing any big alternatives in his main line. Knight g5 is indeed the main move and the most testing, but white has all kinds of playable setups here. That's one of the beefs I have with bishop to d6. If white plays any quote-unquote random move like rook to e1, short castles, bishop d3, knight d7, and here any move, bishop c2, queen e2, c4, all of those are dangerous long-term. It's not like they're losing, but it's also not like black makes some obvious moves and then is equal. So I have some respect for sort of playing more slowly. You couldn't make the same case for queen e2, rook d1, or queen c2. Like, there are a lot of moves in this position and it's very hard to exhaust it completely. That's one of the issues I have with bishop d6. There's also, for completeness sake, bishop g5 is an interesting move. And I think black holds after bishop e7, but it does exist. White can either go bishop f4 or take and play rook e1, d5. So yeah, it's a big territory, this bishop d6. But knight g5, I do agree. Looks like the most testing. h6, queen h5, short castles, knight e4, f5. Knight takes d6, cd. And yeah, you mentioned bishop h6 does force a draw after gh. Queen c7 doesn't really work, does it? Here rook a1, and I think my engine was blinking that this is better for white. So can't recommend queen c7, I believe, once you're here after bishop h6. You should probably recapture, unless it's a calculated gamble. But it looked to me like after rook a1. White should be better there after queen c7. Anyway, objectively, I think white should have reasons to continue here and play something like rook e1. When, yeah, rook f6 or d5 followed by rook f6, as you mentioned, seems to be the main setup. And I also like it better than this queen f6 move, which I also played once, I think, by Levon, but my computer was not a big fan. So rook f6, and here bishop f4, d5, bishop d3. This type of position I don't really like much for black. Black is a pawn up, but it's so hard to gain activity, while white has the two bishops, decent grip on the center, potential play on many sides of the board. Critical game here was it Keimer against I think Pragnananda in Vaikanze. Knight c6, rook ab1, b6, and Keimer played h4. You can also start with rook to e3, something along these lines, bishop d7, rook b1. And I'm not sure, it depends what engine you ask. I think Stockfish says this is equal, Leela says this is better for white. But it's, I think, not a fun position to play with black, which of course sometimes you gotta live with and still try to defend this territory. But yeah, as mentioned, I am more team 7 knight f6 than these positions, which I don't really like in this Keimer game. h4, bishop d7, rook e3. Yeah, similar stuff was played. Queen f8, rook b1, and here rook c8 the computer doesn't approve of. And after something like queen d1, knight e7, bishop a6, white was pressing. It did end in a draw, but overall, yeah, it's so hard to find a good square for this knight, and this bishop is also kind of passive. Then yeah, I'm not in love with these positions from the black side. I would much rather have them with white. And as a known pawn grabber, that means something, since white is a pawn down after all. So yeah, basically, good work. I don't have that much to add. I more or less agree with all your conclusions. I just, yeah, still think that knight f6 is a more prudent course of action than knight c3, bc bishop d6. But knight c3, bc bishop d6 maybe does keep more winning chances. Although, in the main line here, white can also force a draw with bishop h6. So I'm not sure that's a real thing. Yeah, not sure that's helping very much. My issues here with bishop d6, as mentioned, are both that I don't like this type of position very much, and that white has a ton of options in this position, like rook e1, queen c2, queen e2, rook b1, bishop d3. You name it, it's not that easy to defend even against a slow attack on the king side here. Anyway, that was our daily question on the Vienna 7 bishop c4 pawn sacrifice. And let's get to another one. What we got? We got Mr. Jefferson. And what's he saying? He is saying Jefferson 78759. Hi Jan, thanks for all the excellent content on Chess24. I've used your recent 4-night series recently to very good effect. I'm glad to hear that. Good job, Jefferson. I have a general opening question. For a beginning club player, say 1600 till 1800, that's already a good club player, I should say, by the way. Is it better for your chess development to focus on developing a deeper but more restricted repertoire of openings, or rather play different openings to gain knowledge of a variety of openings and structures as you learn, and then perhaps get more focused later? Any thoughts on this? Thanks, Jefferson. For me, and I'm not sure if this is correct or any universal wisdom, but I've always differentiated here between white and black. I always thought it was beneficial with black to have like one opening against e4 and one opening against d4 that you have worked on. We had an earlier question where I was asked about how that process should be. And yeah, you don't have to go through all the scrutiny, but let's say you play, whatever, the Grunfeld against d4 and the Najdorf against e4 or the Marshall against e4. I believe that will give you rich enough positions as long as it's mainline openings that you play, that it's okay to stick to that. Ideally, maybe you want 2 openings you can play one day, but I don't think with black it's very beneficial to your chess development if you can play every opening immediately. I'm not sure if this is true, and I think there are different cases like a young Carlsen or a young Nakamura played a lot of the openings and then did specialize a little more later in the career, or are probably still able to play almost everything. But yeah, I always thought, unless you have a lot of time to work on chess, that it makes sense to stick to 1 or 2 openings with black. And then what I've done is I've been changing them throughout my career, like whatever. I haven't done it for a while, but I'm no longer so active. But in my teenage years, every 2 years or something, I would change whatever. I was playing the Paulsen and try the Najdorf and then change the Najdorf for the Marshall or whatever. Generally, but this is once again, old man, get off my lawn stuff. I believe the earlier you start playing good openings, like mainline openings, the better. Because I waste a lot of time playing 1 g6, 2 bishop g7, 3 c5 against everything, and I feel that wasn't very beneficial because you don't really learn much about structures and so on. Now with white, it's sort of the nature of the beast that you have to familiarize yourself with more openings anyway. You don't have to go as deeply, but I believe with white, once again, you don't have to play 1 e4 and 1 d4 and 1 c4. But even if you only play 1 d4 or only 1 e4, you will have to get familiar with a variety of openings and structures, because there is no one way to play against the Caro-Kann. That can also be used against the Najdorf, that can be used against the French, that can be used against the Petrov and so on. So there you do get exposure to all kinds of different structures anyway. And yeah, with white, my general stance is, and I'm not sure if this is so relevant at 1600 till 1800 level, I still think it makes sense to work on your lines and play more or less main lines, because then you not only get positions with more options, but my general stance is that it doesn't make so much sense to have a fixed repertoire with white, and I try to be a little more unpredictable with white and jump around more there to surprise guys. That, yeah, I don't think is that important at that level. But my philosophy would be to, yeah, with black, really pick one opening against d4, pick one opening against e4. Once you're comfortable with them, or maybe bored of them, you can add another one. But I would not try to play every opening with black, just to develop. Well, with white, you'll be forced to play a lot of openings anyway. If you have the time to master both 1 e4 and 1 d4, or if you are not as much as a nit as me, and you feel like you can play 1 e4 and 1 d4 and just play the ensuing positions, that's fine, but I think you'll also get exposed to a huge number of different structures and ideas by just, playing proper lines within 1 e4 or within 1 d4. So, yeah, that's my advice. I think different ways work for different players, but my advice is have 1, maybe 2, but for starters 1 opening that you feel comfortable with, that you can sort of play when woken up at 3 a.m. against e4 and against d4. And with white, prepare more specifically against certain openings or certain opponents. And by prepare, I don't necessarily mean spend hours before the game, but yeah, think about what you want to do against these lines. Jefferson, 78759, long rant. Hope that helped. vgurunathan is asking, are there any Queen's Gambit declines exchange variation chess 24 videos? I don't think there are, vgurunathan. Thinking about it, no, at some point I was sort of contemplating to, when I was doing my black repertoire series, to give d5, cd, ed here for black to have a consistent repertoire, but in the end I decided against it and I gave bishop b4 the Nimzo and only d5 against knight f3, which I believe is the repertoire that most top players have as well. Let's start with knight f6, e6. Most are not that comfortable playing this d5, cd, ed position with black, and therefore go bishop b4 here and only commit to d5 after knight f3 is played. The point of this is after knight f3, d5, knight c3. Here, if you go bishop e7, cd, ed, let's say bishop g5, in these positions black is in time to get his bishop out with c6, e3, bishop f5, and black is fine. While in the other move order, where white has not committed to knight c3 yet, it's much harder to do so. Let's say we try the same here, c6, e3. If black goes bishop f5, this is a viable line, but white has this move queen f3, creating problems here. Well, if you go bishop e7, white goes bishop d3, no longer allowing bishop f5. So no, there is no Chess24 video series on this position, at least not that I'm aware of. Generally, it's still played, even at the highest level. And with white, I've always been happy playing this position. Like, a lot of theory books will also advise you to play knight e2, followed by short castles and f3, which is very, very playable as well. Me personally, I've always enjoyed these positions. h3, knight f8, short castles, and, you know, some maneuvering battle where white sort of has more plans at his disposal. He can go for the minority attack with rook to b1, b4. He can try to play in the center with knight to e5, rook a1 and f4. Under the right circumstance, he can maybe play e4 in some lines. So I always like these positions for white, and I believe most black players also do not go here unless they have to. So mainly what they've been playing with black is some variations with an earlier knight h5, be it here or after h6, bishop h4, knight h5. And these positions, let's say knight f3. Don't quote me on the move order. I think knight f3 allows knight f4, for example. So let's say long castles, knight to b6, h3, bishop e6. This type of position has turned out to be pretty resilient for black. Therefore, yeah, this is one, I'm not sure if you're asking from the black side or from the white side, that you might want to study, both with the pawn on h6 or the pawn on h7. And yeah, for white has different options against this too. Of course, he can put the knight on e2 in this move order I gave. That always struck me as a very sensible way to play. Then maybe castle kingside. But yeah, black normally does no longer go for this classical setup with short castles, but they're messing around with ideas, with knight h5 early or knight e4 early under the right circumstances. I've seen some h6, knight e4 in these positions. So the old classical line, this stuff, I believe no longer gets played as often. And I believe it's sort of for a reason that white has the more pleasant game, both with the knight on e2 and with the knight on f3. So, I guess I could have restricted myself to no as an answer, but I thought I should at least talk a little bit about the Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation. I hope that gave you some insight. vgurunathan. Krunx is asking another sort of eternal question, or question where we get variations of regularly. Why isn't Benoni played that much on top level? How can white, me, punish black players for playing this opening? Thanks in advance and have a good day. Yeah, it's not played that often at top level because it's very, very risky and a bit shaky positionally. Like, you have to be in the mood, and black has to play sort of inspired to make it happen. There were, of course, players that played it more regularly, like the late Vuga Gashimov was a big Benoni player, of course. Nowadays it's mainly Fabiano Caruana that once in a while gives it a spin. But even Caruana, I don't think he's completely cured for it, but after his recent game against Kayakin, he said, okay, I wanted to make something happen, but the Benoni is such a bad opening that he did not really enjoy the experience very much. So I still think the Benoni usually makes the list of black wants to play for a win, either a must-win situation or a lower rated opponent. There I believe the King's Indian, the Benoni, and maybe the Leningrad Dutch are still very high on people's list. But it's an opening that few top players will have regularly as the main line. First of all, if white starts with knight c3, then it's going to be really tough to pull this off. There are two move orders. The experts nowadays mainly start with e6. If you start with c5, d5, and you're not a Benko guy, but you play e6 here, when white is not committed to knight f3 yet, here white just has such a pleasant choice of scary systems. I think I've talked about it in previous opening clinics. I quite enjoy the setup with knight e2, bishop g7, knight g3, castles, bishop e2, and you don't commit to f3 until black has played rook e8, after which, yeah, white can play f3 and get a pleasant position. So I think that's one easy to learn setup here. If you're more brazen, you can also go for this line, which I believe has a good reputation. Most of the recent games are knight fd7, pawn to a4, let's say short castles, knight f3, knight a6, short castles, knight to b4. And here, yeah, computers are now on black side. King h1 is what they usually play. But computer is also very happy with white after, let's say, rook e1, a6, bishop f1, rook e8, and here any move, bishop d2, for example. So these setups where white has not played knight f3 or move 3 yet, I believe they, at the very least at the top level, they're hard to pull off regularly. So even the guys like Fabi, they normally do it only against knight f3. They go for this. And yeah, here white has a wide choice of options, but nothing that is sort of a refutation of the Benoni, I would say. Like fianchetto guys, they often go for this g3, bishop g2 short castle systems anyway. Although fianchetting the bishop here is to stare at this pawn on d5. If you don't have to, if you haven't played g3 earlier. Strikes me as an odd choice. Then yeah, the main lines are still the main lines. There's h3. Caron played a6 recently, but wasn't very happy. And after bishop g7, e4, castles, bishop d3. Well, black can try to force the action with b5, which is, yeah. Recently, Fabi won a nice game because Mamedyarov played a3 here. But if white takes on b5, then it's sort of a drawing attempt with black, where you have to know quite some theory. But I don't think it's been refuted. There is also this popular system. It's based on bishop f4, castles, pawn to e3, not giving this target on e4. And then bishop e2, where, I don't know, I think white is supposed to be slightly better long term. Because of structure. White just does have more pawns in the center. And it won't be easy for black to organize counterplay. On the queen side, after a6, there always is a4. So, yeah, I guess the structure is not fully sound. You're always vulnerable to this e5 breakthrough. And that's why top players probably won't play this on a regular basis. But as mentioned, there are the Fabis of the world that will play it occasionally. Mainly in rapid chess, but also in regular games, even after knight f3, c5. Normally, you see more sort of cousins of the Benoni at the highest level. If white, for example, commits to f3 here, then black very often plays something like e6, e4, c5, d5. And we get these types of positions. But you get those because white is already committed to the f3 move. And if white doesn't do that, I think most top players just feel like the Benoni is not for everyday usage. Hope that gave you some idea. I don't have a refutation, especially after e6, knight f3, c5. I personally mainly play knight c3 here, not allowing any Benoni business. And after cd, knight d4. Well, black can play knight c6, bishop b4. But yeah, if I had to pick one system here, I guess I would still go with the bishop f4, e3, h3 setup, which yeah, might not be the most ambitious, but it does get the pieces out and get white a very stable position that you can play without too much knowledge, and where you have a bit of an advantage in my opinion. So that's all I have to say for now on the good old Benoni. And how many more questions we got? Is this? Let's take one more by Mr. Crispyambulance. I believe this is more of a general question again. We have a bit of a mix today between general blah blah and very specific theory stuff. And Crispyambulance is saying, hey Jan, hope the heat wave didn't melt your brain and you're still able to give some general advice. We shall find out. I'm getting older and I notice I'm less accurate or need more time to calculate tactically complex positions. My openings were built for my younger self, who was better at tactics and piece play, and less about positional niceties. Niceties? Open Spanish against e4 and Semislav versus d4 and sharp lines as white starting 1 e4. On the other hand, I feel my understanding of positional themes and strategy is still improving, as is my endgame knowledge. Boom! I was with you for the first part, now you lost me. Do you feel I should shift to openings that suit my current abilities, or do you think I'm throwing away years of experience and it will be detrimental? If you do think it's worth changing, what would you recommend? Thanks. It's hard for me to answer that question generally. I think it will depend a lot on your level, on your comfort level with the openings you're playing, or if you think the positions you're getting are a source of your problems and you're just not comfortable in them because now, your calculating abilities have gone down and you'd feel more comfortable in more quiet positions, then I guess that makes sense, but I don't think there is a general rule that one should start playing quieter positions with H and sharper positions when you're young. So I'm not sure. And the openings you mentioned also, open Spanish against E4. It's sort of a concrete opening, but it is also fairly positional, no? So there are a lot of themes there. However, yeah, I don't disagree that it does lead to pretty concrete play. But yeah, if you like the positions you're getting, I wouldn't give it up for the sake of giving it up. If you feel like, I want to learn a new opening, let's play something quieter, maybe my time has come to play the Briar, then by all means do so. But I can't say that that would give you better or worse results, because I also really can't judge yet how big your experience is, if you have like good files on these lines that you're comfortable with, or if you have time to study something new. If you were to ask about a quieter opening in this realm, the Briar somehow is the first that comes to mind, where you rely a bit more on maneuvering and less on piece play. I personally like the open Spanish better, but I also usually try to force the issue quickly. This is why I play stuff like the Marshall or the lines we talked earlier, these bishop c5 lines, which can also lead to quite sharp play. But yeah, here, if you want a quiet alternative, the Briar, somehow, it was the first that came to my mind. Then in d4, the semi-Slav. I also think the semi-Slav can lead to all kinds of different positions. And doesn't necessarily have to be too crazy. After e3, knight bd7, most play is quite strategic in nature, especially nowadays, where most white players play queen c2. After bishop g5, you can still make a choice which line you want to play here. Although, if you're going for this, of course, then events can escalate quite quickly. I'm not sure which move order you play. If you play d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, knight c3 to reach the semi-Slav, then it's reasonably easy to add in an alternative here. We just talked about a6 earlier, for example. If you want something that's not so theoretical and a bit more strategic in nature, you could throw in the odd a6 instead of c6. Or, of course, there are lines like bishop to e7 or bishop to b4 that are also a bit more strategic in nature, I would argue, than the semi-Slav. But the semi-Slav itself is a perfectly healthy opening that can lead to all kinds of things. So once again, I think it would depend on your level of comfort with it, on your knowledge of it compared to the knowledge you could acquire or would acquire in a new opening, and so on and so forth. But I do not think that there is a rule that you should change your openings if you get older and feel you're getting slower tactically. I think it's more if you need to, refresh your relationship to the game in some way and feel like it's time to learn something new, then it's great. But what would give you better results? I would have to be more familiar with your level, your style, your knowledge, and all that. But yeah, when it comes to, if you feel like throwing something in without changing everything, you can still be an e4, e5 player and play the Briar. And here, play, let's say, the Queen's Gambit declined against d4. Stick with that. As for white, for white, if you play e4, I don't know what lines you play. But if you want to keep it a bit more strategic, you can go d6, bishop b5 check, or knight c6, bishop b5. Instead of the open Sicilians that maybe you used to play. And against e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, if you feel you need to slow things down a bit, there's always the gioco piano, bishop c4, d3, c3. So you can adjust your opening repertoire towards somewhat quieter stuff with white, even with an e4, pretty easily. Similarly, here you can switch to the Tarrasch, 7 knight c3, stuff like that. So it's doable if you're more comfortable there. As for generally, I do not know. Anyway, I hope that helped a bit. That's it for today's episode. Thanks for the questions. I think we had some good topics today. And I'll see you guys in the next one or on chess24.com. Check it out.